Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to this quarter's, or Q1 actually's Internet Security Report. Before we jump into our webinar, just want to do a few little quick housekeeping rules. You should be able to receive audio either through your computer with GoToMeeting or through a dial-in, so hopefully you have good audio right now and that's taken care of. Normally, we hold questions for the end, so make sure you check out the questions box in your GoToMeeting interface. Feel free to put your questions in there as you have them. At the end of the presentation, we'll try to take some time to answer them. But since we have two presenters today, we will be able to pay attention to them during the presentation too. So if I do see some, we might try to answer them live during the presentation as well, but we'll definitely get to them at the end. This webinar and all our webinars, by the way, are available on demand at our email webinars page. So if you want the recording for this webinar, feel free to check out the WatchGuard webinars page to get it. And finally, for those of you that are CISSPs or are trying to make sure you get credits for accreditation, this 1 hour webinar is worth 1 CPE credit. So with that said, just want to again thank you for taking the time today to hear about Q1 2022's Internet Security Report, which we just released a few days ago. Before we dive into the details about this report, let me quickly introduce me and my co-speaker, Trevor. My name's Corey Knockreiner. I'm now the Chief Security Officer of WatchGuard Technologies, and I've been our CTO here at WatchGuard in the past. Besides running security for WatchGuard, I run our WatchGuard Threat Lab, a group of analysts that keep our thumb on the pulse of the underground to figure out what cyber criminals are doing, and to both help the world and our product team make sure that we have products that can help protect you. And it's through some of that research that we bring you this report today. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to Trevor to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, thanks, Corey. So I'm Trevor Collins. I'm a security engineer here at WatchGuard, and I've been with WatchGuard for about 7 or 8 years now, and helping out with the security at WatchGuard. But another primary role that I do is also gather all the data that we have from the Firebox feed and analyze that and organize that into our report. I'm one of the writers of the report. And so all that information that is given, I am able to take a look at and organize that we can present this to you.
Cool. And just to introduce you to the rest of the team, we have a full team of authors for this report. I noticed one of our attendees knows Mark LaLiberty. In fact, I didn't update this slide. He's now my Director of Security Operations in the CSO office and the manager of the Threat Lab team. He's not with us today because the lucky guy is out on vacation, so I hope he's enjoying a good time out. As well as you can see Ryan Estes, John Schilling, Josh Stufenbergen. All of them are contributors to this report and have written different sections and are part of our threat team. So the agenda today is pretty simple. We're going to give you some high-level highlights of the report in hopes that you go read all the details. So just to let you know, we do this Internet Security Report to give you some quantifiable historical attack trends in hopes that you can use it as a way to increase your defense going forward. I think if you read the intro of the report, a lot of, I think any job, if you're a manager or a decision maker, database decisions are the best decisions. I don't care how experienced you are in whatever your role is. It's good to have experience. It's good to have gut feel. But really, the best decisions come from good data. So the hope of this report is by taking the quantifiable threat intelligence that we receive from all of our products, we can have a better understanding of what threat actors are really doing in the wild. And by sharing that intelligence with you, you can adjust your defenses accordingly, and you can make better database decisions. So the agenda for this presentation is first we'll start covering what we call the Firebox feed part of this report, which really sums up some of the top malware, the top network attacks we see in the quarter, as well as the top malicious domains. And Trevor will explain a little bit, or I will, what the Firebox feed is. By the way, one of the highlights here is Emotet, a botnet that was taken down by the authorities a little over a year ago, if I remember right, is now back for sure. We will then go into the top endpoint trends, because we have network-based products. The Firebox feed, as you'll learn, primarily is data that comes from our network-based products. But in the top endpoint trends, we take a view of malware from our endpoint security products, such as a WatchGuard EPDR or a WatchGuard's Adaptive Defense 360, which comes from our Panda Security acquisition, a great endpoint company. And one of the highlights you'll hear about is how ransomware has increased this quarter again, despite decreasing the quarters before. Every report, we tend to try to give a top security story from the quarter and or a top research project from our Threat Lab malware team. And beginning of this year in Q1, there was a Cyclops Blink incident that is a botnet affecting a very small portion of WatchGuard fireboxes. And while that was shared in detail back in February, and we've done malware analysis, or external people have done malware analysis on the original victim botnet, in this report, we covered the C2 botnet, some malware analysis of the actual C2 or command and control version of that botnet. So we'll cover that in part, although I encourage you to read the report for the detail there. But again, the point of this isn't just to share the historical threat trends, but to talk about the defense tips that you can enact today to help based on these trends. So throughout the report and at different sections, we're going to share defensive tips that will match these trends. So we're always short on time on these, so let's jump right in and start with the Firebox feed trends. So as promised, just to mention, what is the Firebox feed? Well, it's a marketing name for this anonymized threat intelligence feed we get from our network security appliances we have around the world. We have, probably 400,000 different fireboxes. Not all of them are reporting home yet. We'll talk about that in a moment. But we have tons of fireboxes around the world that, besides blocking ports, they have tens of network services. They have different anti-malware services, IPS services, and all of these services can detect different threats. And basically, this is an anonymized feed for people that opt in to sending this data back to WatchGuard. And by the way, I encourage you, if you use the Firebox, please opt into sending this data. We anonymize it. We don't care anything about your personal information or your private network. We're paying more attention to the actual malware hashes or the exploit triggers we see. And that's what shows up in the Firebox feed. And this feed includes data from not all of our security services, but primarily the 5 you see here. First, we have 3 different anti-malware services, but we focus on 2 of them. One is what we call legacy or gateway antivirus. And gateway antivirus, we call it a legacy antivirus product because it's primarily based on catching viruses with signatures. There's rules or signatures it has to have in order to know if something's malware. As you'll hear throughout this report, there's a lot of new malware every day that evades signature-based detection. So another anti-malware service we have is APT Blocker. APT Blocker is a behavioral sandbox. So when we get files, we can submit the hash to see if anyone in the world has seen it before. And if we haven't, we can quickly analyze it in an automated sandbox looking for malicious behaviors. And the benefit of APT Blocker is even without a signature, it's very effective at catching brand new malware. Something you're going to hear us say, zero-day malware. When we say zero-day malware, a lot of you might tie zero-day to like software vulnerabilities that are brand new. That's typical zero-day. But when we say zero-day malware, what we mean is malware that does not yet have a signature for it. So it would get right past gateway antivirus. For that type of malware, we use APT Blocker to catch it, and it's very effective at catching it. So we get a lot of data from APT Blocker. We also get data from our intrusion prevention or IPS service. So it shows us everything about network exploits, not just server-based exploits, but client-based exploits. So if one of your users browses and has an out-of-date Chrome browser, a drive-by download site triggering a Chrome vulnerability would show up there too. And finally, we get some information from both the network and the endpoint version of DNS Watch Go. At a high level, DNS Watch is a DNS firewall. So as your users are going to any domain, clicking on links, we pay attention to that domain. And if we know it's a phishing domain, a malware domain, or many other types of malicious domains, we can sinkhole it, which means we don't let your user get to the real malicious domain. Instead, we give them a warning that they went somewhere bad. So this Firebox feed is the network intelligence, threat intelligence we use in this report, and that's what we are going to cover next. So let's start really with the high level malware trends, and then I'm going to hand it over to Trevor to go through all the detail. First of all, I mentioned we have over 400,000 Fireboxes out there, but only about 78,000 of them are opting into sharing this data with us. This is up from last quarter, about 3%. And by the way, 78,000 is still a fantastic, statistically relevant amount. But if you're a Firebox owner, the more of you that share this data with us, the better we understand the global threat landscape. You can see here between basic malware, which is gateway antivirus, and evasive malware, which is APT blocker, GAV detections or normal malware detections increased by 4% this quarter, but evasive malware actually decreased for the first time in a long time, 37%. So combined, total malware was down a little bit in Q1 2022 compared to Q4 last year. That said, year over year, this number's up. So it's definitely higher than Q1 2021. And same with IPS, by the way. IPS is a bit down. The other things we track is you'll see both gateway antivirus and APT blocker detections with TLS. What we're tracking here is malware that arrives over encrypted connections. A lot of the malware nowadays is spread via web connections, like drive-by downloads and stuff like that. So we are keeping track with the folks that turn on one of our features. We call it an application layer gateway for HTTPS or HTTPS deep packet inspection. We allow the Firebox with the right setup to be able to decrypt encrypted web traffic and still scan it for things like malware or network attacks. Unfortunately, very few of our customers do that. So this data only comes from a few Fireboxes, but it's very important to do. As you're going to see throughout this report, we see more and more malware using that encrypted channel as a way to evade security controls, because some people can't decrypt this TLS traffic, and or some people don't set it up. So as you can see, while some of the numbers have dropped, basically 60% of malware arrived over encrypted connections. So that gives you a strong idea. If you're not using our HTTPS decryption, you could be missing a lot of the malware your Firebox is able to detect. So those are some high level trends. Basically, malware is down a little bit, and I think you'll see soon that 0-day is down. But why don't I hand it to Trevor to go into some of those details?
Sure, thanks, Roy. So we're gonna go ahead and cover the top 10 malware. This is just the malware that we see the most of that the Firebox are reporting. And there are some typical, the top is here, the Hurry, depending on how you pronounce it. And then the CVE 2018-0802, that's an Office exploit that we've seen the last few quarters, and it's really made a prominent mark on the top 10 list over these last few quarters. Now, what's interesting about this quarter, especially, and you'll see it in the report, is that Emotek has come back. There's three Emotek malware samples that are related to Emotek. The Trojan Vita and the Valeria are number 3 and number 9, are both droppers for the botnet. So when I looked at these two, I'm not sure if they dropped exactly the same version of Emotek. So they may be related, but I wasn't able to find a direct connection there. However, the Mesa, which, let me just look at my notes here, make sure I give you the right one. The Mesa was a Emotek spreader, and I think that this particular one was also dropping the Emotek, but the Valeria was actually a USB type connection or a USB malware or an external drive malware, more to be more general about what this actually does. And this one will actually, after Emotet has been installed, this is a path that I saw happen. It's after Emotet was installed, anytime a drive would be connected, it would then spread over that drive, whether it be a hard drive, a USB, even a cell phone, it'll spread over that. And I think we'll go a little bit more into these Emotet malwares a little bit later as well. Let's go on to the next slide. And so this is our top 5 encrypted malware. So like Corey was talking about previously, a lot of the fireboxes don't even scan encrypted malware. So what we want to do here is take a look at the malware that are coming over an encrypted connection and just seeing what type of malware we see. Now these are a little bit different, except we do see the Vita Emotet malware that is on here as well. This one is likely well, obviously it's the same family, and we believe is related to the Vita family of malware that we saw, or the Vita variant of malware that we saw previously. There's also some others that are the JS agent dropper is pretty standard on this list. Cyrox is the scam file is also pretty standard. I believe that we saw the mail stacked 6 before, but this is just a emailed dropper that was caught in the email instead of being caught by the downloaded file from the email. So those are the encrypted malware lists. And we'll go ahead and take a look a little bit more on the next slide about the Emotet. So the Vita, we can see arrived via email through the Excel, and this was done as over a OLE exploit, very popular Office exploit, and we've talked about many times. We saw this both in the top malware and in the top widespread malware, and we'll cover the widespread malware a little bit later on the next slide. I don't think that we're going to cover the widespread at this point, but it is also in there, and that's in our report as well that I would encourage you to look at. And then the MESA is also one that arrives via HTTP, and it dropped by the Emotet. We suspect it's dropped by the Emotet, but this one is one that will connect to the USB and spread. The Valeria is also OLE exploit, just like the Vita. Launches the PowerShell to spread. It will drop the Emotet and arrives over email. So that is the Emotet. Again, the Vita Emotet was the one that we saw in the widespread malware that has spread the most, and this one especially spread in actually Japan, and you can see more data in our report, but it especially spread in Japan and a little bit in Italy, but really it was one of the prominent malwares that we saw this quarter.
Yeah, if I were to add some color to this, the other thing I might mention is notice malware nowadays is often staged through droppers. It's very rare that you get an email that has an Emotet directly attached to it. So when you look at Trojan Vita and Valeria, both of those are kind of Trojan droppers. They're not Emotet, but they're droppers. The whole point of a dropper is to be this lightweight staged piece of malware that may not be detected because it's not the main family everyone knows about, but that once it gets on your computer, it's designed to go and get child payloads. And the child payload in this case is Emotet. So just understanding that usually nowadays malware isn't delivered where you get the final payload right away. You tend to get stagers or droppers that are really trying to evade security. And that also is why sometimes what we see at a network level is very different than what we see from our endpoint products. Because from a network level, usually we're seeing the stager or dropper. It hasn't gotten to loading the ransomware or the botnet that is going to load, because it's the first stage that's coming through the network. And if we detect and block that first stage, it never gets to the rest. So Trevor, knowing that this was Emotet, was by actually analyzing these droppers to figure out what the next steps were. And then the other interesting thing is MSIL Mensa is a child malware itself, because it is something that, typically Emotet would already be on the system, but then Emotet itself is a botnet that can also download additional payloads. And in this case, it was that auto run worm that just causes it to infect any USB storage device or phone that you plug in. So anyways, the main note I wanted to mention is just realize that usually the big ransomware family name you hear of isn't the first piece of malware that enters your system, because nowadays stagers and droppers are used to hopefully from the threat actor's perspective, sneak past your defenses. And it's also why from our network level, our top lists usually aren't well-known ransomware names. They're these droppers, because we're blocking them before they get there. But later on, when we look at the endpoint version of this, the good thing about the endpoint is the endpoint will see what additional payloads might come from these malware samples. So that's why sometimes our top endpoint threats look a little different. Sorry, Trevor, I'll go ahead and get you to the 0-day section.
So I just had one more note on there. I may have said previously that the Valeria malware was a USB dropper. It was actually the Mensa malware that's a USB dropper. I may have misspoke on that. So, okay, so let's go ahead and do the 0-day malware here. And next slide. Let's go and go next slide, please.
Sorry, getting there.
So the 0-day malware, as Corey was saying, is a malware that is not the 0-day exploit, but one piece of file that is malware that we have not seen previously. And so these are what APT Blocker is able to block. As far as the devices overall, now all of the devices that are reporting, we can see that over 50%, 57.8% of the malware is brand new malware that fireboxes have never seen before, that really we haven't seen before. Only 42.2 is known malware. So without APT Blocker, you're right there, you're missing most of the malware.
And now, by the way, really quick, this is actually a decent drop. The past 2 quarters, we've seen 70% in the high 60s%. So this is technically a drop in sophisticated 0-day malware evading signature-based detection. Yet, as Trevor just said, it's well over half the threats. So even as a drop, if you don't have that proactive malware detection, if you're still using antivirus that is largely signature-based and doesn't use things like machine learning and or behavioral analysis to catch the more evasive new stuff, you definitely should consider it.
Absolutely. And then when we take a look let's take a look at the encrypted malware that's over the HTTPS traffic. This may look a little bit better, but you have to remember we're actually only inspecting devices that are inspecting the encrypted malware. And if somebody is inspecting encrypted malware, usually their security standards are a little bit higher, and people are not allowed to just go off to whatever random website that they want to. So they tend to be a little bit higher security. And that's why I believe that we tend to see a little bit less in the way of 0-day malware over known malware. And however, you still see 44%, which is a large chunk of malware come over 0-day. And if just one of those get through, it can wreak havoc on any business. So 44% for APT Blocker devices that are inspecting HTTPS traffic, and 56% is known malware for devices that are inspecting APT Blocker and inspecting HTTP, but are not actually, but not APT or not 0-day malware.
If I can pause here to give two defensive takeaways for this. One, you already heard, it's make sure you have that proactive signature-less anti-malware detection. But the other thing, just because I saw a question come up, is the other thing is we encourage you to use HTTPS or TLS deep packet inspection. And there, I'm paraphrasing here because since I sent a short answer, it's disappeared the question. But one of the audience mentioned, hey, I've tried to use TLS inspection before, but at a bigger enterprise, I found it difficult and resource intensive. So we encourage you to try to use our product's capability on the Firebox to inspect TLS traffic. Why doesn't everyone do it? I will admit it's because to do this, what you have to do essentially is a good guy man in the middle attack. So it will take a little bit of setup. What you have to do, there's multiple ways to set it up, but basically you have to have our network security device, the Firebox, have a CA level cert for your organization that's part of your root chain of trust, so that even though we're kind of intercepting the traffic and re-signing it with our own cert, it's a cert that all of your users trust. There's a couple ways to do this, and some are harder than others. I mean, the one simple way is we do have a CA cert on our box that you could just export, and then you could find a way using group policy and stuff to push that out to all your clients. But that's frankly a pain in the butt. Even with group policy, people use different browsers. You would have to import it into every different browser. You might have IoT devices and other devices where they can't import certs, or it's harder to import certs. A better method to do this is, for instance, if you're a Microsoft shop that has Active Directory and other Microsoft servers, you already have the capability to make this cert for your domain, your organization. And you can take your already existing corporate certificate, which should already be part of the trust chain for all of your devices out there, and you can import that into the Firebox and make setup of this easy. So step one is setup. I do think once you learn the second way and once you have a corporate cert, it is actually a pretty easy setup. The second issue with this, with HTTPS inspection that some people have, is there are some clients and sites out there that are getting a little stricter with HTTPS, where they do things like cert pinning, or a client, to give you one example, you can set up our HTTPS TLS inspection and get the Dropbox through a browser fine. Because when you go through a browser, it's using the certificates in the chain, and if you set this up right, it will all work perfectly. However, the actual Dropbox client, if you download the client, that particular client actually will not, it will only use the PIN cert that Dropbox publishes. So long story short, there are a few exceptions of sites in certain situations that won't work through HTTPS inspection. But even that can be solved for the people that run into that. While it will take a little bit of work, we have pre-made exceptions for the known ones that we have issues about, and you can add exceptions. So I still encourage you to go through the work of setting this up. And you might find one or two clients or services that don't work, but that can be easily fixed right away simply by adding them through our exceptions to this particular HTTPS setup. The only other complaint I've heard about HTTPS inspection in the far past was it slowed things down. That is not a problem for us nowadays if you get the right resource box, and it doesn't have to be doubling the box that you normally would get. Nowadays, with my tabletop box at home, I have a gigabit connection, and HTTPS inspection doesn't really slow down my traffic any more than anything else. So I highly encourage you to do it. Do know that adding TLS inspection takes work, which is probably why only a small portion of folks do it. But for the one person that did try it, you might want to consider trying it again, especially with some of the new exception capability we've added to our algorithm. Sorry for that interruption, Trevor. Let's move on to the malware by region.
No worries. It takes a lot of work it takes some work to set up the certificates, but I find that a lot of it has to do with understanding the certificates and understanding the order of how things are put together. We do have some documentation, and I know our support is always here to help you guys out as well. Just want to add that in.
Cool. And are you on the regional side now?
Yes, so let's go ahead and take a look at the malware by region here. This is showing our overall malware that we have, and we weighted each region based on the number of fireboxes on here. And so we can see Americas, which is the US, Canada, South America, Brazil, it's highlighted here in blue, is 22%. EMEA, Europe and Africa, Middle East is 56%. So it actually sees most of the malware that we have detected. APAC has also seen 21, just over 21%. So this is just showing that EMEA, Europe and Africa have seen almost, well, more than actually twice as much malware, and more malware than both America and APAC combined. So as far as we don't really have an explanation as far as why Europe is seeing more. And I will say, based on the data that I've seen, it's been mostly Europe, not as much Africa. Some of the Middle East, we get into Turkey and those areas, but we'll see a lot of malware in EMEA. And unfortunately, I don't have a good explanation as to why. And we see this because we are weighted
for this, but unfortunately, the data we get from our fireboxes don't show it. Some of our regional stuff has checked out by third-party sources, right? Though, because I think one of the emotests primarily targeted Japan, like a huge amount of the thing hit Japan. And we found out other researchers that found it too. So while we don't know why EMEA has increased so much in these detections, based on the data we have, it definitely did happen.
Yeah. So
cool.
yeah, so if you're in Europe, definitely you need to make sure, not America and APAC still need to make sure their devices are protected, but in EMEA, especially so.
Yeah, and I will say, you wait for it, but IPS changes this quite we has another very interesting regional thing that happened in IPS, which is unusual, which we'll get to in a second. But I guess that's as good as time as any to transition to, now let's look at network attacks for Q1. And network attacks, by the way, most of this data is based on our intrusion prevention system, because that's what catches network-based exploits. As a reminder, it's not just server-based exploits, it's client-based exploits too. At the highest level, this quarter, we caught just under 4.7 million. We had about 4.7 million IPS triggers from the approximately 78,000 boxes reporting in. As you'll learn in a second, by the way, the average of that would be average of 60 per device. But you'll learn in a second, actually, I doubt each device sees 60 attacks. We have data showing that it's more likely that certain devices get a lot of attacks and some may not get any. Anyways, that 4.7 million, as you can see on this graph, is down a little quarter over quarter from our all-time high, which was Q4 of 2022. However, it's still a 10% increase year over year, compared to Q1 of last year. So it is increasing overall. Looking at the top 10, we don't spend as much time on the IPS top 10 because we find the same exploits show up repeatedly. And I would say the trend is primarily most of these exploits are web-based attacks. I've said many times that the web is the battleground. And by web-based attacks, they're either web application vulnerabilities, they're people trying to take advantage of websites that might have insecure code, or they're client-based web vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities that affect the client that's actually reading web traffic. So things like the SQL injection and the cross-site scripting, those and the web directory traversal, all of those signatures are we have a number of generic signatures that catch common SQL injection or cross-site scripting techniques that show up over and over, and it's very common to see those. And other times we might see, a downloadable Office document killing stuff. To talk about some high-level trends before we get into the new stuff, I will say one interesting thing is we detected, these top 10 signatures, we detect probably just under 500, 400 and some different unique signatures that were triggered this quarter. That said, 87% of all detections were these top 10. So even though we detected 500 different things, these are the things we definitely see most. The top three alone, the Web SQL injection, the file inclusion, and the Connect header buffer overflow, which by the way is a very old vulnerability, those top three account for 65% of detections. And what I'm leading up to here is the reason we think there's so much same stuff showing up on this list is we believe it's just automated mass scans. Whether it's penetration testing tools that gray hats or good guys use, or whether it's botnets that have built-in mass scan commands, they basically have a vulnerability library, which includes a lot of old stuff and a lot of new stuff as far as exploits. And why not just scan the internet for those servers? So botnets all the time are scanning for new computers that pop up, even with old flaws. So we think that a lot of the stuff in this top 10 is accounted for by these kind of mass scans. One other note, I mentioned on average, if you just went to the average of the fireboxes and the amount of IPS hits, it would average to 60 attacks per box. But the truth is, 1% of fireboxes out there generated 80% of the detections. So the reality is every box in the world isn't getting these exploits hitting them. Rather, there's certain fireboxes in different areas that are getting hit repeatedly. And if you go a little further, 95% of the detections are covered by only 10% of the fireboxes. So not every firebox is hit equally. As far as the two new things that showed up in Q1 that hit our top 10, one should be expected, and it's a continuation from Q4. Log4Shell, I assume everyone knows of that vulnerability name. Back in December of last year, there was a huge, CVSS 10, so top severity score vulnerability in Log4j2, a very common Java log parsing library that not just is a standalone product, but is in a lot of open source and proprietary hardware and software products out there. So it affects a lot of things. As you can see, we saw a triple in volume of that Log4Shell detection. When the attack first happened in December of Q4, we started monitoring, and Trevor did see some detections, but that tripled in Q4, which is not surprising considering it's a very popular attack. Hopefully by now everyone's patched to this, but if not, exploit code is all over the place. So be sure that you're patching against it. The second new vulnerability that made our list was that one at the bottom in the 10 spot. That is an old vulnerability in FreePBX. I'm sure a lot of you know PBX stands for Private Branch Exchange. So it's basically for voice over IP telephony. It's a private little branch exchanger to control voice over IP calls. It's Asterisk Software makes a common one. And specifically, this FreePBX vulnerability was in two modules that you could get with it. One used to be called Hotel Wake Up Module. I think it's now just called Wake Up Calls. You can guess what it can do. It's a module that a hotel using this PBX might do to automate wake up calls. And there is also another module called System Recording Module, which could record calls, obviously, which also was vulnerable to this directory traversal attack. In either case, we saw quite a large number of folks targeting this old FreePBX issue. It is an old issue, though. It was patched back in 2016. So as long as you're patching your PBX, it should be good to go. So that was really the IPS attacks in a nutshell. Talking about regionality, it was quite a different, unusual view this quarter. As you can see, 48, so almost half the attacks happened to the Americas, which is not too unusual. But what is unusual is usually EMEA is the top or the second top for IPS attacks, and APAC is usually the third. EMEA in this case dropped to 6.45% of network attacks, with APAC having quite a high amount. Again, unfortunately, we looked into things we have data for to see why this drop happened. It could be, You know, that the 78,000 boxes that are reporting into us, people turn on and off the services throughout the time. So even though we have the same amount of boxes reporting in, sometimes ones that used to have IPS detections don't if they've done some reconfiguration. So it could have to do with the ratio of those boxes reporting in. But we found it very unusual that network attacks dropped so much in EMEA. And it's especially unusual considering malware went up so much in EMEA, but that is definitely how it stands. So really the takeaway for network attacks is down a bit this year or this quarter, still higher than it was last year, and definitely pay attention for Log4Shell if you haven't found all the different software and hardware components that need a patch for that. With that section done, let's quickly cover the DNS watch section, which I'll hand over to Trevor.
Sure. So the DNS watch is where we are able to take a look at any domain requests. This is both on the Firebox and on the client. They take a look at all of the domain requests going through these devices to see and identify based on either the certificate SNI or the domain itself about which type of request is being made, and we have categorized based on a lot of input and streams of data around the internet that we have to categorize each of these into different sections and block any ones that are phishing, compromise, and malware. So you can see that we have these three categories, and the phishing malware is ones, or not malware, but phishing domains. I still got my mind on malware still, but the phishing domains are the ones that are going to try and ask for credentials. They're trying to ask for email addresses, maybe even credit card information. All of those are going to be those types of phishing attacks. Compromised domains are going to be domains that are previously good domains, previously had a purpose other than malicious, that have been compromised due to bad security practices or just being left by the owner, and those have been compromised to point to malicious activity. Malware domains, possibly some of the most dangerous, are the ones that actually are created to spread malware. So any type of device, any type of programs that are downloaded from that domain are type of malware that could be, or not all, but potentially could be malware and that infect your computer. There are a few domains that we see new here, and actually I'm going to start at the right side, the malware, the Nanopool. There's 3 of these domains, and essentially what this is a crypto miner. And while there can be a legitimate reason for a website-based crypto miner, we have found that these are not legitimately used. And so a lot of times what you'll see is a website having a frame that also connects to Nanopool, and then the website itself will use the computer CPU cycles to try to mine for cryptocurrency. And so we don't want to have that, because that'll start running their fans really high and you're going to start having slowdowns on your computer. Also, there could be potential reliability effects on your device. So we don't want to have that at all. So we decide to block them. These are all, by the way, new domains that we saw for Q1. Now, we do have we do have 2 other domains that are new. We're all adults here, so these are porn sites. The Doberman Media is a porn site that we have found, and essentially, well, it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily mark a site that shows adult activity as malware. We do find this one has asked for credit card information, and we are very suspicious of this ask, and we don't believe that this is actually a legitimate request for credit card information. So we definitely would want users to avoid that. Another one, saround.com, is going to spread the malware Sultra. It's a different type of malware that is popular among adult websites. So so we have decided to block that website as well. So that's all of the DNS Watch, and I think we can move on to the next slide. And so what does this all mean? We covered all of the Firebox feed, and so what are we supposed to do about it? So here's our defensive tips on the Firebox feed. Most critical, obviously, is patching. Log4Shell, if I recall correctly, when we first noticed Log4Shell, we noticed attacks on it within hours of it being released. There was somebody mentioned on the GitHub that manage it, that it's part of the management for Log4Shell, that is this a security vulnerability? And within hours we saw of that happening. We saw that. So we don't have days, we don't have weeks, we certainly don't have weeks. If a flaw is noticed, 0 day, especially something that's popular as Log4Shell, then we need to get those patched. Now, not everybody can get those patched, and so one way around this is also to be able to make sure all your inspections like IPS and malware are updated, make sure those are constantly being updated and that you're not on a patch from 6 months ago. The next defensive tip that we would recommend is email security. Most of the malware that we see, like Emotet, is downloaded via email. So and it's downloaded via email through a document, by the way, or sometimes it's zipped, but it's a zipped document. So we need to make sure any emails that are being received, their links are being scanned through something like DNS Watch, and attachments are being scanned through something like RGAV or APT blocker, so that those devices are protected from email. You can't just because, so not only websites that you visit, but also the emails being received. So last advice.
Can I take an opportunity to add a little, while we're talking email security, attachments and links. You want anti-malware. WatchGuard has a ton of network and endpoint anti-malware that can just strip bad links or bad attachments, but links. I've gotten a lot of questions on DNS Watch and how it works. So let's talk about DNS Watch and what it adds to email security. And by the way, there's 2 versions of DNS Watch. There's one that just happens when you're in the office behind one of our perimeter devices. And there's DNS Watch Go, which is just an addition to an agent on your endpoint. But what DNS Watch essentially is, as a DNS firewall, we become your DNS server, meaning, yes, we also talk to your real DNS server as a secondary, but all your clients come to WatchGuard's DNS server to resolve IPs. And I think a lot of you know that DNS is just like the phone book for the internet. The WatchGuard.com, your computer doesn't know how to get to anything called WatchGuard.com. That's a dumb human name. It needs to get to an IP address, and DNS is just the mechanism that translates WatchGuard.com to an IP address. So the way DNS Watch works is essentially whenever you go anywhere, let's say you're going to evilsite.com. Obviously, an attacker site won't be called that. That's too obvious, but let's imagine one is. What will happen is it goes to DNS Watch to say, hey, I want to know the IP address for evilsite.com. And part of DNS Watch is, oh, wait a second, I know the IP for this site, but I also know this is a compromised site, like one of the ones Trevor talked about before. So instead of returning the real IP address for that site, we return to you a safe IP address that we control, and that's what sinkholing is. So the way we actually block people from getting to a site is we're returning the wrong DNS, the wrong IP address back to your clients for sites that we know are evil. And by giving you the wrong IP address, we're sending them instead to a safe site that says, hey, you tried to go to this site, but we know it's bad, and here's what type of site it was that we blocked you from getting at. So for those that wondered how we block, it's simply because as your DNS service, when you use DNS Watch, we can control what IP you actually return. And when we know it's a bad site, we return a false IP because we don't want you to get to the evil site. We want to get you to a safe site. So hopefully that explains one, it's part of email security. People will accidentally click links, so using things like DNS Watch will help. But for the ones asking about DNS Watch, hopefully that answers your question for how it works. For time's sake, we're running really low, so I want to speed up a little, Trevor. The last one, advanced EPP and EDR. And by the way, somebody asked remotely, how can I block this stuff if I'm outside the office? Having a full endpoint security suite. EPP stands for endpoint protection, and at the highest level, that's like proactive anti-malware. That's all kinds of different anti-malware services that prevent malware from even running on your computer. However, malware is getting evasive. There's some types of malware that might sneak past detection. So EDR stands for endpoint detection and response. It pays attention to all kinds of indicators happening on your computer, processes running, what they're doing, so that if something bad does run on your computer, but we start to see it doing bad things, we can nip it in the bud. So our products that provide EPP and EDR are WatchGuard EPDR or Advanced Defense 360. And for the person that asks, how can I prevent these threats remotely? Having a security suite that provides these two things, including WatchGuard's EPDR or AD360, is the defense that will help you with that remotely. And I'll admit there's other EPP and EDR products out there, so hopefully if you don't have ours, you have a good one. I'm a little biased to ours. So sorry to cut you off, but for time's sake, I wanted to get some of those questions and get moving because we have a bit to cover in the next 9 minutes. Endpoint threats. So that covers our Firebox feed, all the stuff we get from our network security. But I just mentioned WatchGuard EPDR and WatchGuard AD360. These are a full suite of endpoint products that we give you or that you can acquire from us. And again, they give you EPP and EDR, so anti-malware, both preventative and detection and response that can help you with breach detection for things that get passed. By the way, they also have a lot of other endpoint security modules, like they can help you enforce patch management, forcefully download and install patches that you haven't done. They do disk encryption. They offer IT folks system management capabilities and email security capabilities. So they're not just antivirus, they're a full suite of endpoint protection. But based on all the information, the threat intelligence we get from our endpoint products, one of the things we pay attention to is how malware actually arrives, because malware arrives in a lot of different ways. Here you're seeing all the kind of different ways. If you read our report, we define this quarter, each one of these very clearly. Like Acrobat, you probably know Acrobat. It makes your Adobe PDF reader. Often malware arrives as PDFs. Windows, a lot of malware tries to leverage legitimate Windows programs. So Windows will be those type of things. NVIDIA, anyone that uses graphic cards probably knows that NVIDIA has some drivers and things. So sometimes malware hooks onto those processes. Browsers means that the malware somehow took advantage of a flaw in Chrome or Firefox or IE. Office should be self-explanatory. It's malicious Office documents. The one that might be weird to some is AutoKMS. That's a name for a well-known cracking or license key piracy tool for Windows. But if you wonder why piracy is quote unquote free, often these AutoKMS installers include malware with them. So these are the different ways malware arrives. But one of the ways I didn't say, and the most primary way, is scripts. As you can see in this chart, 88% of malware arrives nowadays as a script. And another stat you can get in our report is 99.6% of that is PowerShell scripts. One of the most common types of malware attacks nowadays is either fileless malware or living off the land attacks. To me, it's different ways to say the same thing. But instead of malware arriving as a file, the malware takes advantage of legitimate tools on a Windows system like PowerShell, because PowerShell with a privileged credential can do almost anything on a network that any Windows administrator can with the right credential. So who needs malware? Why not run a PowerShell script, PowerShell is legitimate. So a lot of old school malware detection is not going to be able to detect these living off the land techniques because they're using legitimate programs. I will say, however, WatchGuard's products have something called a contextual engine, where we can tell the difference between bad PowerShell and good PowerShell. And that's how we catch a lot of living off the land attacks ourselves. So big takeaway, 88% of malware arrives as scripts. We believe this is because attackers are increasingly using living off the land attacks to evade malware prevention. So you definitely need something that can catch those living off the land techniques. I will say, even though scripts is the most primary way malware gets in, you did see that another way is browser malware. So we also, besides keeping a track of how much malware arrives via, a vulnerability in a browser, we keep track of the most dangerous browsers. The main trends to see here is browser malware is going down, and it's down even more this quarter. So I would be more worried about the script living off the land attacks. But one interesting thing, the browser malware that still happens is primarily targeting Firefox and IE. So a really short takeaway is be sure to patch Firefox and IE and whatever browser you use, because patching them closes the vulnerabilities that this malware tends to use. Final two takeaways from the endpoint section. One, ransomware has increased. And this is kind of a surprise to us because, as you can see, throughout 2019 through 2021, we've been seeing the volume of ransomware lowering. By the way, that doesn't mean ransomware is okay. There's still a ton of big game ransomware, meaning while the volume for the global world is going down, targeted attacks where bad guys target very specific organizations and ask for huge ransoms of 5 to 15 million have gone up. It's just the volume that's gone down. That said, in Q1 of this year, volume has tripled already. Just so you know, in Q1, just in the first quarter of 2021, we are already at 80% of all the malware we saw for the entirety of 2021. And as you can see on this chart, it's triple what we saw through the same quarter in 2021. So big takeaway is ransomware volumes going up. We also have a bit in our report about crypto miners. Just so you know, they're flat, no real changes there, but do watch out for crypto miners. The last thing I do want to cover is an interesting situation that happened that we reported early in Q1 around February this year, February of 2022, called Cyclops Blink. If you haven't heard about it, Cyclops Blink is something hopefully you've heard about, especially if you're a WatchGuard customer. You should go to detection.watchguard.com immediately if you haven't heard about it and are a WatchGuard customer. But essentially, this was a sophisticated Russian government-sponsored botnet that targeted 3 different network manufacturers, including us, and infected a very limited, for us it was well under 1% of firewall appliances. And by the way, it could only affect you if you configured in a very non-standard configuration. If you exposed your web management, your administrative portal to the entire internet, which we specifically recommend you not do even before this happened. In any case, this was a situation where well under 1% of WatchGuard fireboxes had gotten this botnet. And nowadays, you can easily clean this. One thing to know is, besides partnering with the intelligence agencies to talk about Cyclops Blink, we had to wait to this coordinated release to tell you about it. The FBI, with our partnership, has also taken down the command and control channel of this botnet. So right now, the command and control channel is not up either. So hopefully all our customers have read about this long ago. But if you haven't, the command and control channel being down should at least keep you relatively safe. But in any case, if you haven't heard about this, I don't have time to go through full detail here, so definitely check out this page. But one of the things, if you want to understand this botnet a little more, I highly recommend you read this report, because during February 23rd, when we released this, we did, of course, share the UK GCHQ's National Cybersecurity Center did do an analysis of the basic bot, the basic malware that a normal firebox would get. And by the basic victim, I mean, it's just a firebox that would only have the bot, but was not part of the command and control channel. What we have in this report is they used fireboxes as well for the command and control channel. And there was a different version of the malware that they could elevate some fireboxes for. And these were the fireboxes that not only were the command and control channel for devices of ours that were infected, but were the command and control channel for the 2 other manufacturers that were also infected. Long story short, our report contains a detail on this C2, so it's additional malware analysis that goes above what the NCSC shared. It's interesting. Again, the good news is this botnet is now taken down. Hopefully you've patched, so it's not a big deal now. But one example of one of the things we talk about is an additional module we saw that some C2s had the possibility to get, which was an SMB module. SMB stands for Server Message Block. It's the way Windows does file sharing. There was an optional module that this bot could download where it would then scan a network behind one of the devices looking for open SMB shares. And it would only connect to them if they had a guest account access. So it wouldn't try to hack them. It didn't have anything to try to capture hashes and log on as a person. But if you had a wide open guest SMB share, which hopefully people don't do that either, it's not very smart, it could try to connect to it as well. So I wish I had a little time to talk about it in more detail, but this is a much deeper malware analysis that shows you a lot of code analysis and stuff. So if you have security researchers or folks that are interested in it, it was our promised add-on where we do the C2 analysis for this botnet as well. And we share some additional IOCs. We shared with the community a lot of IOCs for Cyclops Blink in one of our Cyclicity posts, but you can learn more about it here. Knowing I'm over, I do want to finish up with some last tips really quickly, and I don't mind staying a little long for questions if people stick around. Main takeaways to this report. Ransomware is going up, no doubt about that. So I think we're all used to ransomware by now. Unfortunately, ransomware protection isn't just one silver bullet defense. Ransomware has so many different avenues it comes in. It's become a multi-vector attack that it can prey on weak credentials. It can use zero-day. It can do things like basic phishing. There's lots of different ways it comes in. But if I were to focus my ransomware defense tips, the 3 I would pick is first, master backup and recovery. Obviously, you should always back up your data, but backing up your data, people say backup like it's an easy thing, but you really not only need to back it up, you need to make sure that your recovery is timely, that you're using some sort of backup mechanism that can recover really quickly. You need to make sure that you're testing those backups regularly so that you don't run into any corruption or problems. You probably should have multiple, not just one, but multiple offline copies of backups and use multiple types of backup. If you do a Google search, I would Google search for 321 backup or 322 backup. And for time's sake, I won't go into that, but if you Google search, it gives you some advice on how many types of backups to have, how many offline copies, and etc. The second ransomware resistance, multi-factor authentication. What does multi-factor authentication have to do with ransomware? Well, I find a ton of the ransomware attacks, especially ones that targeted MSPs in the past, the main vector they got in is they phished employees' privileged credential, and the privileged credential allowed them some of the access they needed to start staging their ransomware. Multi-factor, and there's lots of different ways to phish a credential. Phishing, it could be part of a password leak that your user is reusing credentials. But either way, multi-factor authentication fixes that. Even if someone does get one of your user's passwords, multi-factor will prevent them from logging in because they'll have to use whatever the second factor is that you're forcing. And we have great products like AuthPoint that can help you with this. The final tip I've kind of covered before, it's proactive anti-malware. I talked about how signature-based malware detection doesn't keep up with evasive malware. You need more behavioral malware detection. So make sure you have that because a lot of ransomware is very evasive. So those are the 3 ransomware tips I would add. The final 2 tips, by the way, can also help with ransomware. One of them is harden your MS Office settings. Throughout the past few quarters, we've seen a lot of malicious Office documents. You've probably seen both in the IPS section and the malware section, there were some Office exploits that were causing malware to come in. Often this could be a specific vulnerability. Other times this is based on the scripting and the macros and the OLEs that Office allows. In our report, I have a link to a couple different Office hardening documents because you can do all kinds of very granular macro settings. Macros are the type of thing where it'd be great to just disable them, but some businesses use them. So you can do everything from only allowing macros if they're digitally signed from your corporation, only allowing them for certain users or groups, only allowing them for local documents, not internet documents. Same with scripting settings and other things. So check out our report. There's lots of ways you can harden Microsoft Office settings to prevent some of the user interactive Office documents, malicious Office documents from working. And the same goes for PowerShell. As you learned, 88% of attacks come through scripts, or malware arrives through scripts, and 99.6 of that is malicious PowerShell. There's lots of different PowerShell hardening options you can use as an administrator to make sure that malware authors can't run PowerShell the way they need to as easily. Don't have time to go into them, but check out our actual report, because we do have links to some of those hardening guides from other organizations as well. So sorry we had to speed through that, but I can tell we are short on time. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope it was helpful. Me and Trevor, since we have time, I don't mind staying on for the next 5 or 10 minutes to see if I can answer any questions, but I know your time's valuable, so feel free to log off if you need. Real quickly, I do notice one of the attendees asked, an event like this about patch management solution would be very welcome. Well, the cool thing is I have an organizer, Nicholas, listening on the call. Our WatchGuard EPDR in 8360 has a fantastic patch management module. So thank you for that feedback. We'll note it. And maybe some of our endpoint experts can go over how our products can help with patch management. Another question, let me see. I have salespeople that all work from home. And by the way, we're a tech company. We still all work from home. How can they use WatchGuard EPR for these users? Well, essentially, WatchGuard EPTR and 8360 are just endpoint clients you install on their, hopefully, even though they're at home, you have corporate mandated laptops. And it would simply be an agent that you would add to your image for your corporate mandated laptop. And once you add this image, it reports into a central management system that you, whether your IT is at the office or whether your IT is at home too, they log into the WatchGuard Cloud or Aether, and they can see management of all the different endpoints as a central management for all of that. So they can see all the remote endpoints. You can add local host-based firewall rules. You can turn on all kinds of different anti-malware protection. You can add our patch management module, but it's just a matter of installing that product on all your sales folks' computers, and it protects them wherever they are. It's always active and even controls their local host firewall if you set that up. And because it's centrally managed, it gives you, wherever you are, you can manage every laptop for the folks you have out in the field. So very cool solution. Let's see, what else do I see?
I saw one, Corey, where they were just asking about how can you see if I have an old WatchGuard device, or I'll just read the question. Hello, I am Simon. I am an assistant IT manager. Our system has an old WatchGuard firewall. How can I check to see if this is still supported and buy a license? So one thing that you can do to check to see if it's supported is to take a look at our WatchGuard end of life policy. Probably easiest way is just to Google WatchGuard EOL. That first link there will bring you to the WatchGuard end of life policy. You can check and match up your device. As far as buying a license, if you don't have an account, then I would recommend to either contact one of our sales manager. I believe Nicholas can probably help you out with that, or you should be able to log into the account and start creating a customer care case and just give them the device serial number that you have, and I'm sure can point you in the right direction.
And by the way, this is assumption here, but depending on if you were asking because of Cyclops Blink and wondering if your maybe out of service Firebox is affected, do know we specifically are doing support for even out of service fireboxes. If you're so old, there's some that wouldn't even be affected by this. But the point is, to a certain version, definitely if you're curious about Cyclops Blink, call into support. They can help you. And even if you're out of service, we created a mechanism to get you to the updated software regardless. So I don't know if that's why you asked, but just wanted to point that out. Another question I see is that this is someone that must use the endpoint that comes with the Firebox. We have a different endpoint agent called Threat Detection and Response, TDR, that instead of coming with our endpoint suite, it's part of the Firebox suite. And the question is, how is that different than WatchGuard EPP and EDR? A few things. First of all, TDR is not preventative anti-malware. It's not made to replace your antivirus. It's supposed to work with your antivirus to provide the EDR, the endpoint detection and response part of it. So anything your antivirus misses, TDR has a few things like host ransomware prevention, where it can actively detect a ransomware and other threats that as they start to run on your computer. So you can really kind of loosely relate TDR more to the EDR portion of an endpoint suite, although I would call it EDR light. So do know in the future, now that we launched TDR before we acquired Panda Security, in the future, TDR is going to become something called EDR Core. And so if you have it today, one day it's going to be replaced, and it technically will be the exact same client as our WatchGuard EPDR, but it will be limited functionality. It will only give you some of the EDR Core capability of that client. Because that's kind of the only thing TDR did too. So do know TDR was kind of an interim solution that provides the EDR addition to an existing antivirus vendor. Now that we have a full endpoint suite, you could totally replace TDR with this suite. But if you already have the TDR licenses, don't worry, we're transitioning that to something called EDR Core, which is really part of our endpoint suite, but you'll get the EDR portion of it. So hopefully that makes sense. Continue to watch product management. When this happens, product management will announce all of that. May not be able to answer some of the questions. Feel free to pick up a few if you want, Trevor, as I look for some other ones.
Yep. So I see one question. I think we kind of love this question here. MFA, are you seeing this as a requirement for Active Directory domains? We have it on our Office and cloud services, but still struggle to sell it for local networks. Do you think we should have MFA everywhere? Yeah, this absolutely. I think this is definitely a leading question, but I'm totally on board with this. At this point here, we have our Darknet scans tool, which I'm also part of, and we're constantly putting thousands, millions of found passwords on our scan tool every week. We're seeing these passwords just leaked all over the place, and we're still seeing weak hash methods that are easy to crack, even on longer passwords, 8, 9, 10 plus character passwords. Or passphrases even. So MFA is 100% a requirement if you want to keep your login secure. The password, as many have said, is dead, and it's not going to keep you secure in your environment. I see it all the time. So I see the passwords leaked all the time. So I think it's the notion that you can use a long password to protect your network is no longer true.
Good. And by the way, you were answering the MFA question, right? I will say, to say it my own way, MFA should be everywhere, and AuthPoint should make it easy to do. And what I mean by everywhere, the first second someone logs into their Windows or Apple desktop or laptop, they should get a multi-factor prompt just for the login. Every single employee, not just your privileged IT guys, every single employee. So AuthPoint allows that. It integrates with Active Directory. Soon we'll be having some Windows Hello updates that makes it even more powerful there. But it can be part of your normal laptop login every day. And while we use this cloud-assisted push, we can do it offline too with QR codes. It should be part of your cloud applications. The person that asks is, should it just be cloud services or should it be other things? I think it should be other things too, but it can easily be part of SaaS applications, public cloud applications. Our AuthPoint does integrations through something called SAML, which pretty much every cloud and SaaS service supports. So you can add MFA with a single sign-on portal to just about any cloud service or SaaS service you want. So it should definitely be part of that. It should be part of your VPN. If you have radius, any sort of radius authenticated services, VPN or other privileged services or routers, we have integrations with that, not just WatchGuard VPN, but you can add our MFA to competitors VPN or any VPN out there. So I think MFA should be everywhere. I think a lot of organizations say, yeah, we use MFA, but you learn that, oh, they're just using it for their privileged login in the IT group. I think every employee should have it. And the reason we didn't in the past is it was harder. You know, you had to get it to either have hardware, which is a pain in the butt to deploy, or you would have to enter a third thing like some sort of OTP. But now that it's all mobile based and you just have to click one button to approve things, it's become much easier. And I would say when you're doing it with SaaS and cloud services, the single sign-on portal makes MFA easier. You know, in the past, I would have to log into Office 365 once. I would have to log into Salesforce once, Dropbox. I'd have to log in multiple times. Now, every day I go to WatchGuard's AuthPoint portal. I log in one time with strong MFA, and then I see little icons for every single one of my services. And because of the SAML integration, I just click a button and the MFA, the MFA is still used to authenticate to those other places as well. So I definitely think MFA should be widely deployed everywhere. I think it has one of the highest return in investments for security controls you can add, just because so many flaws are credential based. I think for time's sake, there are a ton of other questions, and I love the engagement. We might have to cut it off here, but do know that our organizers can send us a list of questions so we can see if we can answer some more of them in email as well. But thank you guys so much for our time. If you want a recording of this or you missed some, feel free to check out our webinar page. And thank you all very much for joining us today. Don't forget to check out Simplicity if you want to learn more about cyber crime and other security news out there.
Thank you for joining. I did have one last question that I answered about a lot of people I see asking where the report is. It is available at WatchGuard, and I have also provided a link to that question. You should be able to take a look at it and find that link as well.
Cool. Thank you.